ever have been in the first ever national championship. Oh, I'm joined now by an SEC fan, United States Senator Tom Cotton. Senator Cotton, welcome.
Hugh, first off, I'm conducting this interview under protest, given that bumper music. And second, I have not decided for whom I will root tonight, but I may have to root for Ohio State simply because I fear you would be completely insufferable for the rest of time, or at least the next year, if Ohio State wins.
It's a pretty good bet that I'm going to be insufferable if they win for the rest of the show. Hey, I did that. That was lighthearted, but there's so much serious stuff. I got to switch gears on you in a hurry. First of all, your reaction to the United States not sending anyone to Paris yesterday.
It's pretty stunningly bad judgment by the president and his senior team. At a minimum, you would have thought Vice President Biden or Secretary of State Kerry would have gone, and the White House press secretary acknowledged it today. To me, actually more troubling news from Sunday was the fact that they're calling a summit, and the summit is going to be on violent extremism of apparently some indeterminate origin, which just suggests that the president still is unwilling to call the enemy what it is, which is radical Islamist terror. It's not some kind of mysteriously motivated violent extremism. It's Islamists who have a very firm and long-standing worldview that hates the West and hates everything the West stands for. And what happened in France last week was just the latest manifestation of it. It wasn't some turning point. It was just an example of what radical Islamists have been doing to attack the West in any way they can for decades.
Now, the immediate story, 3 hours ago, the Telegraph reported that U.S. CENTCOM, their Twitter account, had been hacked by the Islamic State. Now, you were deployed under CENTCOM when you were in Iraq and Afghanistan, and I don't know how often you check their Twitter account, but and I don't know how important it is that they have a Twitter account, but that the Islamic State can hack it is not reassuring, Senator Cotton.
Well, it would appear that the account was hacked. It's unclear who did it or if it truly was someone associated with the Islamic State. I would simply say, well, we're still very early in this, and first reports from the front are often incorrect, that it doesn't inspire confidence in our cyber defenses, that a Twitter account run by our military can be hacked. So I won't say anything more on it. I'll certainly just be working to get to the bottom of it and figure out what we can do to fix it to make sure it doesn't happen again.
Now, the much larger question than a Twitter account is the one I'm going to close the show today with Fred Kagan from the American Enterprise Institute, where, of course, he runs the Critical Threats Project. I'm going to ask him, what do we need to do to stop the volcano erupting in ISIS land? The volcano which hit Paris last week, the volcano which seems to be inspiring Boko Haram, and which has this permeable border between Europe and ISIS land that is, for the sake of me, I can't understand how these terrorists are able to move back and forth, one of them apparently escaping back to Syria over the weekend.
Well, Hugh, the first thing that the president needs to do is just call it what it is, not violent extremism, but radical Islamist terror. Second, we have to get back on the offense. Even in Iraq, we're still on the defense. We're simply protecting territory and assets from the Islamic State's advance. We're not trying to roll them back in Iraq, certainly not in Syria. But you can see the metastasizing nature of radical Islamist terror just in the news today when you had former members of the Taliban claiming allegiance to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the Islamic State leader. Osama bin Laden said something once about America's position in the world in the late 1990s. When people see a strong horse and a weak horse, they by nature root for the strong horse. And too many people right now look at America and see a weak horse. It's time that once again we show that we're the strong horse on every single front of this war against radical Islamists.
Lee Smith from the Weekly Standard wrote that wonderful book called The Strong Horse based upon that, and I'm hoping it's being read widely. You've been there now for a week. I know they haven't had the retreat yet, but on armed services, there's, of course, Senator McCain is the chair, and Lindsey Graham and you, and I believe Senator Ernst and Senator Sullivan are on there. Has there been any sort of organizing conversation yet about how to present the alternative view of the world, even right down to the language we use, or is that still in the offing?
We've had numerous conversations, Hugh, yes, about the failed policies of this president. We have a lot of responsibility for military programs on the committee, but we also have responsibility for national security policy. One good forum to air those differences and to clarify the choices that our country faced will be at Ashton Carter's confirmation hearing. and for that matter, at all confirmation hearings. It's a chance to really delve deep into the policy that our president is pursuing. Ultimately, this is not, though, a question about Chuck Hagel or Ashton Carter or nominees for anyone else. It's the president's policies, and the president is the one who needs to change his policies when he looks around the world and sees the smoking ruin of the failure of those policies.
Now, when do the Carter hearings begin? Because I think those are very important. I'm going to cover them very extensively, and it sort of requires a heads up. And I don't even know if C-SPAN has figured out yet that they ought to be carrying those things wall to wall.
Hugh, I don't think we've set a date. That's because Mr. Carter had surgery last month, and he's not yet able to come to the hearings. But the Armed Services Committee is ready to go as soon as he is. So we're simply waiting for a date when he's fully recuperated and ready to start.
In the meantime, does the committee consider it the appropriate venue to hold status of forces review of how strong ISIS is? Because I spent the weekend trying to get an assessment of how strong the ISIS forces actually are, just in terms of numbers and equipment, and can they actually use the stuff we left behind? Can armed services open up that conversation so the American people can figure out what's going on here?
Hugh, we can have some kind of conversation, at least a conversation that would give a sense of the order of magnitude and scale. Not all of that information can be discussed in a public hearing on the Intelligence Committee as well, obviously. That's something to which I'm attending closely. Suffice it to say, as published reports would indicate, the Islamic State is large and growing, and it's fair to call it perhaps the most well-armed and well-financed terrorist organization in the world. That's why it's so important that we get back on offense and we show the world that the United States is once again the strong horse. The Islamic State is a weak horse that's destined for defeat.
And then some inside the baseball tall grass before we turn over to football tall grass. The Armed Services Committee flips control when Senator McCain becomes the chairman, or did last week. That means they got to hire new staff and expand their offices and all that stuff. Is that seamless, or is that still ongoing? Was that prepared in the interim between November and now, or is it something that can only unfold after you actually get the gavel?
Largely seamless, Hugh. This is something that all the incoming committee chairs prepared last fall. They prepared not just their staff hires, but also the agenda that they wanted to pursue. Senator McCain obviously has deep and rich experience himself. A lot of his staff from his personal office will be moving on to the Armed Services Committee, and then a lot of the Armed Services Committee minority staff under Jim Inhofe will remain on board. So it's really just a matter of expanding, not starting over. So we're ready to go, and we're eager to go. We had a hearing set for tomorrow with Henry Kissinger, along with the Foreign Relations Committee. Mr. Kissinger had to back out of that because of some sickness on his part, but that just goes to show the kind of high-level hearings we're ready to start right now.
I hope those get away. I'm looking forward to those. Tom Cotton, always a pleasure. Thank you, Senator, for joining us, and good luck in the first set of hearings as they unfold. And go Bucks. I'm sure you'll be saying that a lot throughout the evening, and next week you'll be cheering with me. The result is the Little Ducks leave only feathers behind. I'll be right back. America, don't go anywhere. Joe Kernan checks in from Squawk Box on today's Market Moves. It's